At 70 years old, Daniel Harris had learned that silence could be louder than any sound. 3 months earlier, his wife Margaret had passed away after a short illness. For 45 years, they had shared the same small house on Maple Street. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with memories, birthday parties, family dinners, and the quiet comfort of growing old together. After Margaret's death, the house felt painfully empty. Daniel still woke up each morning expecting to hear Margaret humming in the kitchen or watering her beloved roses in the garden. Instead, there was only the ticking clock and the creaking floorboards. His daughter Emily called him almost every day. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone," she insisted. "Come stay with us." The kids would love to have their grandpa around. At first Daniel refused. The house was the last thing he had that connected him to Margaret, but loneliness can slowly wear down even the strongest hearts. Eventually, he agreed. The following weekend, Emily and her husband Mark arrived with their SUV to help him move. Daniel packed only 2 suitcases, some clothes, family photos, and Margaret's favorite teacup. Emily's home was large and modern, located in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes away. When they arrived, Daniel noticed how different everything felt. The driveway held 2 expensive cars, and the house looked almost too perfect, like something from a magazine. Mark greeted him at the door with a polite smile. "Welcome, Daniel," he said, though his tone sounded more formal than warm. Inside, the grandchildren ran toward him excitedly. "His grandpa," shouted 12-year-old Jake, hugging him tightly. 10-year-old Sophie followed, asking if he had brought the chocolate cookies he used to bake. Daniel laughed softly for the first time in weeks, but one child stayed back. 8-year-old Lily stood quietly near the staircase, watching him carefully. She didn't run forward like the others. Instead, she gave him a small, uncertain smile. Something about her expression felt strange, but Daniel couldn't quite explain why. That evening they all sat down for dinner. Emily talked cheerfully about work. The children chatted about school, and Daniel tried to join the conversation, but Mark remained unusually quiet. Whenever Daniel spoke, Mark simply nodded and quickly changed the subject. At one point, Daniel noticed Mark and Emily exchange a brief glance across the table, a glance that looked uneasy. Daniel told himself he was imagining things. After all, they had welcomed him into their home. Later that night, Daniel unpacked his things in the guest bedroom. He carefully placed Margaret's photograph on the nightstand. "I hope I made the right decision," he whispered softly to the picture. Just then, the bedroom door slowly creaked open. Daniel turned around. Little Lily stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind her. Her eyes looked nervous. "Grandpa," she whispered. Daniel smiled gently. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lily walked closer, lowering her voice as if someone might hear. Then she said the words that made Daniel's heart suddenly pound. "Grandpa, you need to leave this house." Daniel frowned in confusion. "Leave? But I just arrived." Lily glanced toward the hallway, her face pale. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Because something bad is going to happen to you here." Daniel stood frozen in the middle of his room after Lily left. Her small footsteps faded down the hallway, but her words stayed in his mind like an echo. "Grandpa, you need to leave this house." At first, Daniel tried to convince himself that it was just a child's imagination. Maybe Lily had watched a scary movie or misunderstood something she heard. Still, the fear in her eyes didn't look like a joke. That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. The unfamiliar room felt cold and uncomfortable. He missed the creaking sounds of his own home, the soft glow of the porch light outside his bedroom window. Most of all, he missed Margaret. The next morning, Daniel went downstairs for breakfast. Emily was already in the kitchen making coffee. "Good morning, Dad," she said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" Daniel forced a small smile. "Well enough." Mark sat at the table scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when Daniel greeted him. The silence felt heavy. After a few minutes, Emily suddenly walked over holding a thin folder. "Dad, there's actually something we wanted to talk to you about," she said casually. Daniel noticed how quickly Mark looked up from his phone. Emily placed the folder on the table and slid it toward him. "It's just some paperwork," she explained. "Nothing complicated." Daniel slowly opened the folder. Inside were several legal documents. His eyes scanned the first page, and his heart began beating faster. The documents were about property ownership. If he signed them, His house on Maple Street would legally be transferred to Emily and Mark. Daniel looked up in confusion. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Emily quickly smiled. "Oh, it's just so we can help manage the house and your finances. You know, in case anything happens." Mark leaned back in his chair. "It's the responsible thing to do," he added. "You're getting older, Daniel." The word stung more than Daniel expected. For 45 years he had worked hard to build that home with Margaret. Every wall, every room held memories of their life together, and now they wanted him to sign it away. "Dad," Emily said softly, "you trust us, don't you?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned another page. At that moment, he noticed something in the doorway. Lily was standing there quietly, watching. Their eyes met. Very slowly, she shook her head. Daniel closed the folder. "Think I need more time to read these," he said calmly. Emily's smile faded slightly. "There's really nothing to read," Mark said sharply. "Just sign it." Daniel pushed the folder back across the table. "I'll think about it." The tension in the room grew thick. Later that evening, Daniel returned to his bedroom, still troubled by what he had seen. A soft knock came on the door. Lily slipped inside again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Grandpa, I heard Mom and Dad talking last night." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "What did they say?" Lily looked down at the floor. "They said, once you sign the papers, they're going to send you to a nursing home." Daniel's heart dropped. Lily looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "They said you're just a burden now." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak, but inside him, something had changed. They thought he was weak. They were about to be very surprised. That night, Daniel sat alone in the guest room, staring at the folder of documents lying on the small desk. The words Lily had whispered kept replaying in his mind. "They're going to send you to a nursing home." For a moment, Daniel felt an overwhelming wave of sadness. He had raised Emily with love and sacrifice. After Margaret passed away, he believed moving into his daughter's home would bring the family closer together. Instead, it felt like he had walked into a trap. But Daniel Harris was not a helpless old man. The next morning, while Emily drove the kids to school and Mark left for work, Daniel quietly stepped outside and made a phone call. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Richard?" Daniel said when the call connected. "Daniel Harris," a surprised voice replied. "Well, it's been a long time." Richard Collins had been Daniel's best friend since college. More importantly, Richard was a retired lawyer who had spent 40 years dealing with property and legal disputes. "I need your advice," Daniel said quietly. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Richard at a small cafe near Maple Street. Daniel explained everything: the papers, Mark's strange behavior, and Lily's warning. Richard listened carefully without interrupting. When Daniel finished, Richard leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Well, my friend," he said, "your daughter and son-in-law think they're clever." Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. "What should I do?" Richard's expression slowly changed into a knowing smile. "Let them believe they're winning." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean?" Richard tapped his finger on the table. "You signed the papers, but not their papers." 2 days later, Daniel returned to Emily's house with a calm expression. During dinner, he cleared his throat. "I've thought about those documents," he said. Emily immediately looked hopeful. Mark leaned forward with interest. "And?" Emily asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "I've decided to sign them." A flash of satisfaction crossed Mark's face. "Good," Mark said quickly. "I'll bring the papers." But earlier that day, Daniel had already met Richard again. The folder Daniel now carried didn't contain Mark's original documents. Instead, Richard had prepared new legal papers, documents that would completely change the outcome. When Mark placed the papers on the table, Daniel pretended to read them carefully. Then he signed. Emily looked relieved. "Thank you for trusting us, Dad," she said warmly. But Daniel noticed Mark's greedy smile. 3 days later, a black car pulled into the driveway. A man in a suit stepped out and knocked on the door. When Mark opened it, the man handed him an official envelope. "I'm here regarding Mr. Daniel Harris's property transfer," the lawyer said. Mark eagerly opened the document, but as he read the first page, the color drained from his face. What is this?" Mark stammered. The lawyer spoke calmly. "These documents confirm that Mr. Daniel Harris has transferred full ownership of his house." Mark's hands began shaking. To his granddaughter, Lily Harris. Emily gasped. Mark looked up in shock, and Daniel simply sat quietly in the living room, watching the truth unfold. The living room fell into a heavy silence after the lawyer finished speaking. Mark stared at the document in disbelief, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages again and again. "This has to be some kind of mistake," he said angrily. "Daniel was supposed to sign the property over to us." The lawyer adjusted his glasses calmly. "Mr. Harris signed the documents willingly," he explained. "And these papers clearly state that the house on Maple Street now belongs to his granddaughter, Lily Harris." Emily's face turned pale. "But why would he do that?" she whispered. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. His back was straight, and his voice was calm, "Because Lily was the only person in this house who cared about me." Mark slammed the papers onto the table. "You tricked us," he shouted. Daniel shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "You tried to trick me first." The lawyer placed another document on the table. "There is one more detail," he said. "Since Lily is still a minor, Mr. Harris will remain the legal guardian of the property until she becomes an adult." Mark's anger quickly turned into frustration. "That means you still control the house," he said bitterly. Daniel simply nodded. "And I will be moving back there." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please," she said softly. "We were only trying to help." But Daniel looked at her with quiet disappointment. "Help," he repeated. "You were planning to send me to a nursing home once I signed those papers." Emily looked down, unable to answer. A week later, Daniel returned to his home on Maple Street. Walking through the front door felt like breathing fresh air again. The house was exactly as he remembered, the old wooden floors, the family photos on the walls, and Margaret's beloved garden outside the window. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him, holding a small watering can. "Grandpa, the flowers look thirsty," she said. Daniel smiled warmly. "Your grandma would agree with you." Together they stepped into the garden. Daniel showed her where Margaret used to plant roses, tulips, and sunflowers. For the first time in months, laughter returned to the house point one afternoon, while they were planting new flowers. Lily looked up at him thoughtfully. "Grandpa, are you mad at Mom?" Daniel paused for a moment, then he sighed gently. "Sometimes people make bad choices when money becomes more important than family." Lily looked worried. "But you didn't punish them." Daniel gave a small smile. "Though, I did." He looked around at the peaceful garden. "They lost something much more valuable than a house." "What?" Lily asked. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder. "Trust." Months later, Emily came to visit. She stood quietly outside the gate, watching Daniel and Lily laughing in the garden. Tears filled her eyes as she realized the painful truth. Her father hadn't taken revenge with anger. Instead, he chose dignity, kindness, and the one person who truly protected him, and sometimes, that kind of revenge was the most powerful of all.